Welcome back, skateboard nerds. This is video 2 in our 4-part series for beginner balance tips. In this video, we're going to talk about the center line. That's that line right down the middle of your board. And we're going to get into how to position your feet, where to position your feet relative to the board, so that when you bend your ankles and knees, you shift pressure right to the middle of the board to help you stabilize that board. Because when we get a little bit shifted too far towards the toes or the heels, it makes it real difficult to adjust through the ankles, knees, and hips to create that balance. And this is hugely important because you don't want to skate with straight legs. You don't want to skate bent over at the waist. You don't want to skate over flexed anywhere. You want to find a spot that allows you to get into a comfortable position where your ankles can be flexed, your knees can be flexed, your upper body is nice and upright, and you're able to move a little bit to control pressure and make things happen on your skateboard. Everything from turning to ollies to tricks, whatever it is that you're trying to learn, you're gonna have to be able to be in the right spot on your board so that you can allow your body to move into a position that allows you to be athletic and make amazing things happen. This is how you're gonna tap into your potential and control your skateboard and have great balance while you ride. All right, let's get into this thing and see what we can figure out. Okay, so why is foot position on your board important? Like, why should I put a foot covering the bolts, not covering the bolts, that kind of thing? And why should I slide it this way or that way? It's really important to understand that wherever your foot is, to start with, will change how you can actually move your body. And we're going to get into some of that body movement stuff in the next video. But in this one, let's figure out how to locate a good foot position for starting out, for beginners. And we want to start with that thing called the center line, right? So if we draw a line from end to end of the skateboard, right down the middle through the bolts, and these guys right here, these are our bolts. That's what attaches our trucks to the board, right? And if we think about that center line, and we're going to position our feet based on that center line, that's our first reference point, and then the location of the bolts. Because wherever we put our feet relative to that center line will cause the board to tip, right? And wherever we put our feet relative to the bolts, that'll change pressure and balance along the length of the board, which is really important when we're starting out. With too much pressure, for example, back on the tail of the board, we might just lose the board out in front of us and fall backwards. Too much pressure over the front, over the nose of the board up here in front of these bolts, and we might actually put too much pressure on the wheels, get a wheel stopper, and fall forward, which is no fun either. We got to understand where the pressure is based on where we place our feet. And there's really no rule to where you can place your feet. You can put your feet on the board however you like. But when you're starting out, you want to find a spot that's going to work well for you. A critical thing to understand is that right here in the truck, we have something called the kingpin. And in the last video, we talked about how the bushings and this bolt right here control some tension. Because if you know where the kingpin is, then you know when you put pressure towards one set of wheels or the other, or one edge of the board or the other, the board tips. And the pivot point is the kingpins. One in the front and one in the back, right? And we need to know that we want to keep our balance relatively close to that center line, which is connected or aligned. Just imagine an imaginary line from one kingpin to the other. That way we know if we're close to the center when we bend our ankles, if we know where the pressure is going to land on our foot, then we can stay pretty stable. So when you're trying to figure out where to align your foot relative to the center line, it's pretty simple. You just want to make sure that when your ankles and knees are bent, most of the pressure is across the foot with a slight dominant amount of pressure towards the ball of the foot. So on the shoe, these contact points right through here, we want most of the pressure, like maybe an extra 5% of pressure there. So when I align my foot, I'm not going to put the ball of my foot right on the center line with my toe back off the edge like that. I'm actually going to slide the ball of my foot slightly towards the toe side edge so that the ball of my foot is just towards the toe side of that center line. That way when I bend my ankles and knees, I should be in a pretty good spot to feel pressure across my whole foot while having the ability to balance on the balls of the feet ever so slightly, pretty much right on top of that center line when the board levels out nice and flat, right? So if we're looking at it from this perspective, right about there. Now, before you start trying to step on your board, I want you to watch video 1 of 6 in our Learn to Skateboard series, because we actually go through a 3-step process to step on and a 3-step process to step off. It's really simple. We put our front foot on, and for beginners, this is just a good reference for beginners. Put our front foot on and we cover all the bolts with the ball of our foot except for the bolt closest to our pinky toe. Then we put our back foot on right back here in the crease of the tail. So when you look at the board, you can see there's a little curve right through here. We want to put our foot in the crease or above it up on the tail. This will give us the widest stance we can once we pivot into position. So front foot goes on, pointed forward, covering all the bolts except for the pinky toe bolt. Then the back foot goes onto the tail in the crease or above. And then finally, the last step of the 3-step process is we pivot our front foot to cover all the bolts. Now, the key here is we want to keep that front foot mostly behind the front wheels. So when I place that front foot on the board, you can see, even if I'm covering the bolts just barely, that my hand, in this case, or my foot, is still behind the front wheels, meaning in between the 2 sets of wheels, right? If my front foot gets out in front of those wheels out here, then I can load too much pressure and cause the board to stop. The wheels will roll, then they'll hit a pebble or a crack, stop because of all that added pressure, and I'll fly forward, which is no fun. It happens, but it's not the most fun thing. So when we start out, let's keep that foot at least just barely covering the bolts, or maybe even a little inside towards the back truck. Now, the more inside you go, the narrower your stance is going to get, and the easier it's going to be to overweight the back foot and the tail, and the board slips out from underneath you, and that's no fun either. So good foot location for reference, right? That back foot up in the crease of the tail or above, right? Our front foot covering those front bolts, but still behind the front wheels, which you can see pretty clearly there, right? So behind the center, the axle right here where that bolt is, the axle runs right through those wheels, behind that axle somewhere, so we don't get too much pressure on the front foot. Now let's talk a little bit about foot angles. So once you've located your feet and you've at practice stepping on and off the board and gotten used to that, then you want to get really comfortable with how your feet are angled on the board. So I prefer a little bit of what's called a duck stance for my beginners. And that means our toes are pointed out just a little bit. My front foot's probably pointed out a little more than my back foot. But the feet are still relatively across the skateboard. So if you're looking at my front foot, toes might be pointed at an angle, something like that, right? A little bit of forward angle. And when you're looking at my back foot, toes might be pointed just slightly towards the tail, but still foot's in that crease. Now straight across is totally fine on both feet, but you know, some skaters skate with their feet pointed forward, and they have 2 feet pointed fully forward, and they skate in that stance just to cruise around and have fun. Some people have more of a straight across back foot with a more forward pointing front foot. These are all fine stylistically, but they all create different limitations in movement. And that's a critical thing. Understanding that where your feet are positioned will limit how your ankles and knees can bend and move. And what happens when you bend your ankles and knees to the pressure on the skateboard is so critical. Because if my front foot's pointed forward and my back foot's pointed across, my knees and ankles are going to bend in different amounts, and it's going to be, in the beginning, harder for me to control where my pressure is between my feet, so where my balance is between my feet. And that's what's so critical. So starting out with either straight across or slightly duck is going to give you the most natural place to start. And keep in mind that when we widen our feet and we open up our stance and our feet go from being just under our hips to outside, more under our shoulders, our toes, the way our bodies are designed, in most cases, our toes tend to want to point out. That's a very natural thing. We want to go with that, because if we kind of go with our anatomical design, then we're going to be able to make a greater range of motion with less catch points and binding points in our body where we have to start compensating when we want to, say, get low or stand tall, or later on create carves, or learn ollies, or any other trick that we want to learn. Super critical to kind of get a good feel for how the foot position affects your ranges of motion and how it affects pressure control and balance control along the length of the board and the width of the board. So that is to say, if you're having a problem where you're always tipping towards the toes, or you're always tipping towards the heels, it's probably because your foot position is a little off. And when you go to, say, bend your knees and ankles, and you try to get a little low or recover from some balance, you might find yourself rolling all the time towards the toes. And if we just adjust the foot position closer to the center line, we might be in a place where we can control and level out that skateboard and get it rolling straight. And the opposite could be the case, right? We might need to adjust because we're always rolling towards our heels. You might have a problem where you always feel like you're going to fall backwards. We might need to adjust the width of your stance, or make sure we're changing how we stand so we get a little more pressure over the front foot. That's the key. We got to find a neutral position. That means a place to start from that'll allow us the greatest range of motion while keeping the board under control. And that's all relative to foot position. So the key points for the center line and foot position are to first start with the reference points, right? You got the center line, you got the bolts, and you got the crease of the tail. Now, that helps us align where we want to put our feet on the board. Now, foot position is pretty simple. Front foot, we want to be covering or slightly inside those front bolts with the foot angled slightly forward. The back foot, we want it in or above the crease of the tail. That's right where the tail ramps up, with the toes pointed slightly towards the tail. Both feet positioned with the balls of the feet slightly shifted towards the toe side edge, so that there's a little bit of dominant pressure on the balls of the feet, but very close to the center line of the board, so that it stables out and levels out with our feet in a good position for us to be athletic. And remember, our foot's in the wrong position, we won't be able to bend our ankles and knees and move freely the way we want to when we skate. I hope all of this helps you get a better feel for where to put your feet and the importance of putting your feet in the right spot. And as you progress, you'll learn that you can put your feet just about anywhere you want on the board and find balance. But in the beginning, it's good to have a nice starting point, a neutral starting point, where you know that most of the variables are eliminated and you'll have the best chance of being successful. Now, make sure that you stay tuned, because the next video coming up, it's all about how the ankles, knees, and hips work together to shift pressure and adjust pressure from the toe to the heel side of the center line, and from the nose and the tail of the board, and to get you stacked up so that your body will move effectively. Hey, thanks for nerding out with me. Can't wait to see you in the next video. Our goal is to help you learn how to skateboard and understand more about skateboarding. If this video helped you, be sure to hit us up in the comments below and tell us what you'd like us to focus on for our next video. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, and then subscribe to our channel and tell your friends all about us. If you'd like to learn more about the United States Skateboard Education Association, please visit www.ussea.us, where you can learn more about how to skate, learn more about helping others learn how to skate, and become a certified skateboard coach.